It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. Just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Check out Spreaker if you look in the archives for our guest today, Alissa Fleck, Alissa Fleck, Fleck. We had her on previously to talk about this Madeoff, this bigger than Madeoff, this con man that she wrote an article about, huge expose. I think she's the only one that was exposing this guy too. Lucky Madeoff, something like that. But you can find Alissa Fleck on Twitter at Alissa Fleck. You can find her on her website, alissafleck.com. She's got a podcast called Gone from Glendale Pod. But guess what? They found the girl in Glendale. So the podcast is over. Until there's a new development. Then there will be an update at the Gone from Glendale Pod. But until then, unless maybe the same girl go missing again. You never know. Gone from Glendale Pod. Alissa Fleck, I'm so sorry for teasing you. But thank you for coming to the show. Remind the audience, who is Alissa Fleck?
Thanks so much for having me, Ed.
Yeah.
I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for about 12 years now, and I'm actually pivoting to the law. I have a master's in criminal investigation, but I'm now planning to become a lawyer. And, I cover fraud, white-collar crime, cold cases, things like that. And I'm very interested in fraud.
So, very cool. What kind of law are you going to practice?
Criminal, of course. Has to be.
Okay, if I should ever get in trouble again, I will come down and I will have Alissa Fleck on speed dial. Remind us, so we had John back real quick about that Madeoff case. Remind the audience, what was that about?
Yes.
Any new developments?
Yeah, so that was a case that I wrote about on my blog, and that came to me by way of someone who had been defrauded by this man, and as well as another journalist who sort of tipped me off to this. And the article was about a man who had been defrauding people in his area in Texas for generations, essentially, and was continuing to do so. And this had peripherally resulted, we don't know the exact causality, but in the murder of the murder-suicide of his son's wife, and their 2 young children. This was a very tragic story that was not being picked up in the mainstream news at all. At least the dots were not being connected. And Lucky Srinivasan, he is still out there defrauding people as far as I know. The updates from the story the last time we talked are that he is being investigated. We know that an investigation has been opened. We have some confirmation that's happening. But I've also had contact from many people who have said, thank you for putting out that story, because Lucky contacted me. He wanted me to invest in something. Gave him a quick Google. This was the first thing that came up. And now I know, I could have been out of my life savings. So it's just a reminder to do your due diligence, before you give your money or to anybody. Just do a quick Google search.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate too, because you have an ex-girlfriend or an unhappy tenant or whatever, and they could just write all kind of crazy stuff about you on the internet too. So it's a two-sided coin. But That's great to know, man. And I'm in shock to hear that this guy is still up to his shenanigans. No consequences, huh?
Yeah, not yet. No news as of yet about him being. Having any real consequences. I think the charge that he would be looking at would be something along the lines of racketeering, but that can be hard to prove, especially when you have a situation where it's an individual who's dealing with a lot of business in other countries, and there's a lot there, but hopefully it's being investigated by the right people.
Yeah, maybe he can be added as the 20th defendant over there in Georgia in the RICO charges.
There you go. Yeah, I just keep stacking them up, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, why not? Hey, but real quick, though, because now I assumed that you were going to be a defense attorney. I mean, you wouldn't be a prosecutor, would you? You don't want to go to the prosecutor's office, do you, Alissa?
Oh, I mean, I'm feeling pretty prosecutorial these days, Ed. I've got to be honest with you. I always saw myself as a defense attorney, but I'm feeling prosecutorial these days.
Oh, Alissa, you break my heart. Alissa Fleck, AlissaFleck.com. Gone from Glendale Pod. I tell you, I used to like Alissa. Tell her about
well, you need someone honest in there.
No, there you go. I can't complain. Okay, so that's an update on the Madeoff, the Bigger Than Madeoff story. I'm going to replay that this week. That was a good show.
Thank you.
Now, you've been on a tear on Twitter, basically about you're upset, if I have this correctly, you're upset about these reality TV shows that kind of pawn themselves off as documentaries that are targeting these cases and building up these emotions that people think that the convicted people actually could be innocent, and if we organize and research this ourselves and form blogs and teams and go out there at the scene, we're going to get this guy out of prison.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and there's a name for it. It's called innocence fraud, and really? It's a phenomenon that's been around for a long time.
So then, well, give us some examples, and which ones had you the most upset?
Yeah, well, when I think about innocence fraud, the case that really opened my eyes, and the one that I'm really here to talk about today is Adnan Syed and the Serial podcast. And I think people will be blown away to hear that, a lot of people, because most people who heard the podcast and are aware of this case, that's the extent of their knowledge. They haven't dug any deeper. They're not necessarily legal minds. Right. This was something that reached across and touched everyday regular people who, okay, they listen to the podcast, they move on with their lives. But when I talk about innocence fraud, I mean, this is something that you could say goes back to O.J. Simpson. When does a defense go too far? Mm-hmm. And I think it's a fine line. It's a gray area, but, that's what we're here to talk about.
I hear you. Yeah, as a defense investigator, sometimes you're sitting around, your client is guilty of sin. What are you going to do? But you have to give him a defense. And, well, we got to come up with something.
You want to know what you do?
Yeah, what do
you want to know what you do? Go ahead. You call Netflix.
There you go. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So who is Adnan Syed? I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So let me tell you about this. Okay, so the background of this case. So Adnan Syed was a high schooler in Baltimore in 1999, and he was very smart. He was in the magnet program at Woodlawn High School. He was also Muslim. He was a regular attendee at the mosque, the mosque that his family attended, and he was a very big part of his Muslim community. And at Woodlawn High School, he was very popular. He was crowned prom prince. I think that was in 1998. And he was allegedly, and by all accounts, very popular with the ladies. And at the time, so in 1999, he was dating another high school girl named Hae Min Lee. She had moved to Baltimore. She was originally from Korea. She moved to the United States with her mother, and they'd lived in Florida, California, but they ended up in Baltimore at the time. So Hae Min Lee was also at Woodlawn, also in this magnet program, and she was dating Adnan. And the only reason that Adnan ever became a name that is known to anybody is because he was convicted and serving a life sentence for murdering Hae Min Lee in 1999. So, the story seemed fairly simple and straightforward at first. A high school girl goes missing. She's found murdered. An anonymous tip comes in to look at the recent ex-boyfriend, who was known to be kind of controlling and obsessive. The case goes to trial. It goes in front of a jury. They convict him. There you go. And he was in jail.
But based on what evidence was he convicted? What was the outstanding evidence? Witness, forensics?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the biggest, I think I would say the biggest case against him was the witness Jay Wilds. And Jay Wilds was I think he dropped out of school. I'm not sure if it was Woodlawn High School, but he'd known Adnan for a while. They were buddies who smoked weed together. They'd smoked weed together something like 10 times. It's probably more than that. But Jay Wilds was an African-American living in Baltimore at the same time period. So they were like weed-smoking buddies. And Jay's girlfriend was Adnan's best friend. Her name was Stephanie. So Jay, he's become a very interesting and polarizing figure in this case. But essentially, he came clean to the police and said, Adnan told me he was going to kill her.
Really?
This is what he did. This is how it happened. And I helped bury the body. Yeah. And then he led police to Hae Min Lee's car where it had been dumped by Adnan and he. So that was the case, right?
Let me ask you a question now. That's pretty good. That's pretty good evidence. Again, that's pretty good. That's pretty good witness testimony. I was holding this shovel as we buried the body together. But what caused Mr. Jay Wild? Did he have other charges, another case? What caused him to be in a position where he was sitting there in that interrogation room, spilling his guts?
Yeah. Well, so he was arrested maybe before this confession happened. He was arrested maybe a week prior.
Okay. He
was pulled over for some traffic violation. He had a very bad relationship with the police, of course. He was a black man in Baltimore in 1989. He had I think there's a quote from him saying something like, "I wouldn't call the police even if somebody was spraying me with bullets."
Yeah.
So that kind of tells you what his relationship was with the police. And that's something important to remember in this case, because the defense will tell you that Adnan was set up by the police and that the police railroaded Adnan. And one argument I would make is if the police wanted to railroad someone, Jay Wilds would have been the easiest person in the world to put away and lock away and throw away the key.
True. You got half a confession. Yeah, you got half a confession out of the guy. I had the shovel in my hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you have all that. And there's a lot more, obviously, if you go and read all of the trial testimony.
No, but real quick.
A whole lot more.
Real quick, he gets pulled over on traffic, but then what? They found marijuana on him or something like that?
Oh,
what
okay.
caused him to confess?
So that day is interesting for a reason I want to come back to later. But what actually the reason they get back to him and the confession is they're looking at Hae Min Lee's. So there's this anonymous tip, and they're looking at call logs. They're looking at Adnan Syed's cell phone, and he called all of these people. And I think one of the people he called was a girl named Jen Pusateri. Jen Pusateri comes into the police station. They call her, and they say, "What do you know about Adnan?" She says nothing. Then the next day she comes into the police station with a lawyer, and she basically gives Jay's confession. Jay had confessed to her. So she gives Jay's confession. She has a lawyer and her mom with her. So then, naturally they call in Jay, and he's like, "Yeah, what Jen said is true, and here's my confession." So that's how they got back to him.
Now, was he facing charges for helping to dispose the body?
He was facing charges, and he was ultimately charged, but he never did any time.
Okay.
And there are some suspicions that perhaps the reason he never did any time was because the police didn't record his first interview, or maybe they didn't, maybe they didn't advise him of his rights, or he didn't have there was something a little weird there, a little sketchy, and I think maybe that was kind of their mitigating thing. But it doesn't look great. It looks a little, it's one of the things that doesn't look great.
Yeah. Do we know what he pled guilty to and what he was charged with and what he pled guilty to, ultimately?
I don't. It's probably something like accessory after the fact.
Gotcha. No problem.
Like that for helping to bury the body, yeah.
No problem.
I'd have to look at that more specifically.
So that's the main evidence they have against our friend here, Adnan Syed. Now, what happens when they bring him in?
And there were fingerprints as well. There were fingerprints as well of all of her stuff in her car. We'll talk about that in a little bit, though. That's going to come back. But I want to talk a little bit about my journey through this process, because I feel like it's kind of important to explain how I became involved, because the way I became involved is kind of, I think, relatable to a lot of people who are not necessarily journalists or investigators, but just people who care. Because, we have all this evidence against him, right? It seems cut and dry. And yet, last year, in 2022, Adnan was released from prison. He's a free man. He's walking around among us. And he has a job at Georgetown University where he does something involved with the Innocence Project there. So he's employed by the university, and he wasn't released on the premise that he's innocent. He was released on the premise that he didn't get a fair trial, right? Allegedly. And I think that's also an important point, because his guilt versus his fairness versus the fairness of the trial is something that is often conflated, and I think that is almost a strategy used by the defense. Like, all right, he might be guilty, but his trial was unfair, so there you go. And I think that's an important point. But so 2022, he's released. He's a free man. Also, feel free to cut me off if I'm like monologuing.
No, you're great. You're great. Go ahead.
Obsessed and pathological with this case, so I tend to just go off. But so Serial, the podcast, the podcast heard round the world, right? The first true crime podcast. It opened our eyes, and the music. Oh my God, the music! It was so catchy. It took us in. You almost fell in love with Adnan. So Serial came out in 2014 when I was like a new baby journalist, and I was actually considering law school. I think I took the LSAT but canceled it. So I was very idealistic, and it was this was the first true crime podcast to launch a genre. And I didn't know this at the time, and I think I can be forgiven for not knowing this. But Serial, the podcast, was a total con job, a total con. And so Serial, the podcast, did not come out and claim Adnan is innocent. And Serial, I think, it was a production of This American Life from NPR. But Serial does skew and misrepresent the facts, and sort of just floods listeners with like this misinformation and distractions and diversions and red herrings, things that are really in no way like essential to the case. Like when I think back to Serial, there was this whole debate about whether there was a payphone in the Best Buy parking lot, and that was seemed like so critical to us to know. And it's like, that means nothing when you look at the facts of this case. But I mean, we had no reason to know who Adnan Syed was. Like, Adnan Syed was not a name that people outside of Baltimore would know. And then Serial comes out, and it's, we don't know that we're being emotionally manipulated.
But let me ask you this, Alissa. What caused the podcasters from Serial to choose this Adnan Syed case?
Oh, yeah. So we're going to get to that.
Okay.
We're going to get to that in a second. Like, give me 2 seconds, and I'm going to get to that. So I listened to Serial, this journalist, 2014, and all my friends did, everybody I knew, and I was not convinced that Adnan was innocent, but this podcast definitely humanized him and, made me care about this person. And I think, kind of going back to my naivete, I never really stopped to ask myself, like, why does this podcast really exist? Like, okay, it's here to give us a fair look at Adnan, right? Whatever, like on the premise on the surface. But why, literally, does this podcast exist? So in 2014, in Serial, we are introduced to someone named Rabia Chaudhry, okay? She is Adnan's biggest champion. She is a newly minted immigration lawyer in D.C., maybe not even quite yet past the bar, but about that, thereabouts. She is Adnan's best friend's sister. So Adnan's best friend was a guy named Saad. Rabia Chaudhry is Saad's sister. She's the one who brought the case to journalist Sarah Koenig of Serial. She's the one who brought her the case. She made a very persuasive argument for why Serial needed to take this, or for why there needed to be a Serial. Look at this injustice. Yeah. You need to cover this. But what she brought her was incomplete. It was a very cherry-picked version of the defense file. an incomplete version of the defense file, and one that really favored Adnan.
Well, okay, then what about the host then of the serial podcast? Do they have any kind of experience in investigations or in
No.
No?
No. And that's one of the things she says at the beginning. I think Sarah Koenig says, I'm not a this, I'm not a that, I'm not an investigator. But it's like it almost doesn't matter. Like it's almost like the folksiness makes us believe her more. Like she's somehow more honest. And I don't. The only fault that I can find with Sarah Koenig is that maybe she should have done a little more research. I don't think that there was malice in her heart. I honestly, like, allegedly and in my opinion, I see two people in particular behind the scenes pulling the strings and conning the system, and they're Adnan Syed and Rabia Chowdhury. And, yeah. I mean, something important to know about Rabia Chowdhury is that the day Adnan was arrested, she was the first person outside of his house on the news camera saying, you know, he's innocent, we're going to fight this. She's been there since day one. This is her fight. And she is the source of all of the information that has ever come out, and it's all lies. I mean, it's not. I don't want to just say it's all lies. It's all misrepresentations.
Well, you know, like,
and manipulation.
Yeah, and any attorney. Well, she's not a criminal defense attorney, but she's an immigration attorney. No. But any attorney, you want to present the best side of your case to the public. Right. You know, the best you can. You know, you want to put out all the good stuff and try to diminish the bad stuff. So I can't blame her for that. But I got to tell you something. There is a lot of shade, and I'm not saying anything specific to this serial podcast or anything, but in the podcast world, there is a lot of shadiness goes on with people wanting to finance things in order to manipulate the public. Okay, then there's definitely quite a bit of that goes on.
Well, this goes a lot deeper, too.
Okay, go ahead.
Like, we're just scratching the surface. Like, we're not even scratching the surface. So when you listen to Serial, Rabia actually kind of emerges as this hero figure. She's a hero for Adnan because she's a friend of the family. Like, why does she care this much? Yeah. But she cares. And then everybody thinks, you know, I'd like to have someone like Rabia in my corner. Like, that's heroic. She really believes in this guy. And why does she believe in this guy? I don't know, because she's a friend of the family. Well, that's good enough for me. Mm. But nonetheless, so she emerges as this hero, right? But not only is she a hero for Adnan, she's also a hero for Hae Min Lee, because Hae Min Lee is the real victim. And Rabia really cares about, you know, finding the person who really killed her, right? Wrong. No, I'm just kidding.
But that sounds like right from the playbook of the West Memphis Three. Yes. Okay, these poor boys are innocent, and the poor victims, the real killers out there, and no one's. We need justice, real justice for those poor kids. When meanwhile,
and it's like, how far back does it go? You know.
Yeah.
So in Serial, Rabia actually kind of emerges like, you know, she's kind of this consistent background figure. One of the things that she talks about. With regards to the cops who railroaded Adnan into, you know, being convicted of this crime, she decries all this Islamophobia that's happening in Baltimore, right? I think something that's important to remember is this case happened in Baltimore in 1999. 9/11 hadn't happened yet. Like, I'm not denying that there is Islamophobia. There's absolutely Islamophobia, but they had an African American fall guy that would have been so much easier to railroad than Adnan. It's like you can't. He was portrayed as this golden boy. It's like you can't have it both ways. Like, he can't be the Islamophobic, like the villain of the Islamophobes, and this golden boy that everybody loves. Like, it just doesn't make any sense, especially considering this is pre 9/11 when like things really got bad for Muslims. Like, I'm not going to say it wasn't bad before that. I don't want to say that, but
yeah, because there was that Beirut bombing. There was the bombing of that the ship. You know, all that kind of stuff. That did, and the first Trade Center bombing was no joke either. You know, the first Trade Center bombing.
Right.
But no, we keep talking about how poor Mr. Syed was railroaded. So giving him the benefit of the doubt, what is the defense? What is their examples of the railroading?
Yeah, I mean, they love it. I mean, Ed, it's truly choose your own ending, because this railroad goes in every direction. It goes in any direction, and it goes into different dimensions. I mean, they found so many people, like, just spun crazy, these stories of how this happened and this. So one of the things they said is the police knew where Hae Min Lee's car was all along, but they wanted to make Adnan the fall guy. So they framed Jay and they told him where the car was, and then on tape got him to confess where the car was, because this important clincher was that he told them where to find her car. After, they dumped the body. We dumped her body. We buried her. Here's where the car is. He gave him the car. Like, that's his connection to the crime. So the defense is saying, no, the police knew where the car was. They told Jay, then turned on the tape and got him to regurgitate the story. That doesn't work, because the car was missing for weeks, and the cops had everybody on the northeast seaboard, all the cops on the northeast seaboard looking for this car. So there's no way they knew where it was. Jay led them to that car. But the defense says, no, the police railroaded Adnan and framed Jay. They knew where the car was, and they wanted Adnan to be the fall guy. Beyond that, I really don't know why.
Again, reminds me of the West Memphis 3. There's like a playbook to this, with
there's patterns.
Yeah, Mr. Bojangles, all the stepdads. Choose a new stepdad this week. The stepdad of the month, who must have done it. Same kind of thing there, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you really see these trends emerge, and that's why it becomes, I don't know, you just feel like at some point you have to say something. And, they really also capitalize on that idea that Adnan is this charming golden boy. He's perfect in every way. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough to what extent that is not true. Everything they say, so they say he's such a good guy. He was an EMT. He was working as an EMT illegally. He was 17 years old. He was not legally allowed to be an EMT, but he lied to become one because he wanted to look cool. Like, then, he was stealing from his mosque, and they tried to spin that as like, oh, everybody steals at that age. It's like he was stealing money from his mosque. And then they portray him like, oh, he was so romantic. He loved Hae so much. He was such a textbook controlling narcissist abuser, in my opinion. Okay. So,
real quick, what about his time in incarceration? Did he have any discipline while he was incarcerated?
Like, allegedly, he's been a totally perfect choir boy, right? I believe that could be true. I also have no idea what to believe anymore when it comes to him, and I feel like until we get our hands on any actual documentation of him behind bars, I don't trust the information that comes out.
Gotcha.
So after Serial, there was an HBO documentary. Rabia was behind that too. She stars in it, actually. It's very touching. When I saw the HBO documentary, I was still a believer in Rabia. Actually, I kind of thought Rabia was a hero, to be honest. You should watch the HBO documentary. I think it's called The Case Against Adnan Syed, and there's a picture of him on like sort of the cover of the documentary, and it's, he's so handsome. It looks like a magazine cover. Okay, so she puts out this documentary, right? Kind of. Also, Rabia was not happy with Serial because it did not staunchly advocate for Adnan's innocence. It left it too much on the fence. She wanted Serial to come out and be like, he is innocent. So because that did not happen, the HBO documentary comes out to continue building her case. Rabia also starts a new podcast. It's called Undisclosed. Have you heard of it? Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't. No, I've barely touched on this Syed case.
Okay. So she starts this podcast called Undisclosed with a man named Colin Miller. He's evidence prof on Twitter, and a lawyer named Susan Simpson. She's, I think, View from L2 on Twitter. They're just sort of like Rabia champions, basically. I would describe. I mean, I don't want to say that they don't. I mean, I don't trust anything Colin Miller puts out there. I haven't really looked into Susan Simpson, but so Rabia starts this new podcast, Undisclosed. She wants to tell the hidden story behind what Serial didn't tell you. I never listened to it. I couldn't. It was unlistenable. I don't know. I think I also tried to listen to. I'm sorry. I don't know if I should be saying this, but I tried to listen to Truth and Justice by Bob Ruffin, and it just wasn't for me. I couldn't get into it. There was something about it. It just was not my. Some things hook me and some things don't. But then Rabia started another podcast.
Wait, but by the way, real quick, Bob Ruff is another one. I had him on the show. Like I said, we got along. Along fine on the show. But he started insulting me on Twitter a couple of days later. He says this whole thing about, well, I'm looking at this with an open mind. But then it became so clear he went into it with a bias, and at the end, if you notice, all these defenders of the West Memphis Three have gone after a stepdad, except for the one who's kept a really low profile. You know what I mean? The only guy who's stayed out of the spotlight, that we don't have a face to go along with the accusations, he's the only one that has been accused. Otherwise, all the other stepdads have.
Right.
It's just it's
a choose your own ending.
Yeah,
right?
it's really disgraceful, the whole West Memphis Three thing. But go ahead, continue with this. Bob Ruff's. So Rabia starts a new podcast, and if anyone's keeping count, I don't know, and this might be number 5, 6, something like that. But this one is the one where everything changed. This podcast is called Rabia and Ellen Solve the Case. Oh, there you go.
And there you go. And it's
reminds me of Dershowitz when I wrote a book that proves I didn't molest Virginia Giuffre, and it's proved in my book.
Yeah. Because if you wrote a book, it's true.
I think the book is called I'm Innocent or I'm Vindicated or something. Proven innocent. Oh, my God. But people fall for it, man. People fall for that stuff. It's just...
I know.
Okay, so her podcast is called what again?
So she starts this podcast, and I think this was last year, so 2022. This podcast is called Rabia and Ellen Solve the Case, and she's riding the coattails. You'll recall in 2022, Adnan was released from prison. This is the year he's released from prison.
Right.
So riding the coattails of that, Rabia, now an expert on innocence, a self-proclaimed expert on innocence, she decides to start this podcast because she's going to solve the case on a bunch of other wrongful convictions, right?
Okay.
So she teams up for this show with Ellen Marsh, whose expertise in crime comes from her career on Broadway, because she is a Broadway singer and not a lawyer or someone who has any experience in solving crime. And this is a talk show where they bring on celebrity guests to give their opinion of a crime.
Wow.
And it's just complete and utter absurdity and nonsense. So, all right, so they have this podcast. It launches. It hasn't launched yet. It's about to launch. And I'm excited because, to me, Rabia is still a hero, right? I listened to the first episode. It was either the first or the second episode, and it was about why Scott Peterson is innocent.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So that was painful.
By the way, Scott Peterson, as we're looking back on the Peterson case, we really need to take a fresh look at this guy's fertilizer business, where they were selling anhydrous androxide, which is the key methamphetamine ingredient. We've all watched Breaking Bad. By now, everyone knows this. Okay.
Ed, you're kind of a prosecutor yourself. I don't know where you get off thinking that you are a defense attorney.
Well, but some cases are. But let me tell you, if I worked for the defense in Peterson, I'd come up with a lot of good stuff.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right. And like we said off the air too, you're sitting around, you come up with these crazy defenses, these burglars across the street, and if it blows up in your face in court because there's a sober prosecutor there with the other side, but on the radio or on a podcast when there's no one arguing with you, or there's music in the background on Netflix, it sounds great,
And And I am really, really hesitant to draw this analogy. And the only reason I feel in any way qualified to draw this analogy is because I did have ancestors who were deeply impacted by the Holocaust.
Okay.
It's like this thing. We all wonder, how could the Holocaust ever happen? How could something like that? How could a genocide like that ever happen? Right? And you just kind of think Nazis bad. But I would argue, and I think a lot of people would argue, that a lot of the Nazis were people who thought they were doing something good. They thought they were heroes, and they were kind of just gullible, naive. I mean, a lot of them were straight up evil, but a lot of them thought they were doing the right thing and didn't really look or dig any deeper, and they ended up committing a genocide. Okay, so that's an extreme, or they were complicit in this genocide. That's an extreme version, but what I'm trying to say is people think they're doing the right thing, and they justify it in their minds that they are doing something heroic, and it's very, very, very damaging to other people in a big way if they choose to not look any deeper. And
even the worst people in their hearts are well-meaning. They think they're doing good. They think they're all right.
They're the heroes of their own story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they justify it. And I know that to herself, in my opinion, Rabia has justified why she's doing everything she has done for Adnan. I know to herself that she has justified it, but I think it's dangerous. I'm talking about it because, honestly, like, all jokes aside, I think it's dangerous, and it's frankly, I think it's criminal, some of the things that have happened.
And on this Solved Case podcast, I forget what it's called exactly, but something about solving the case.
Undisclosed.
Yeah, right. Now, on that one, the latest podcast where they solved the Peterson case, too. So,
yes.
So,
Rabia and Ellen solved the case.
Rabia and Ellen solved the case. What was it with the Rom go to high school reunion? It's the same two girls. The ones who invented the 3M... Post-its,
Wait, Romeo and Michelle?
Yeah. The same girls who invented the Post-its are solving cases. That's the show I got to produce.
Yeah, I don't want to get sued for defamation because she's highly litigious, but
really?
It's also like, I think she's also up to her eyes in, like,
yeah.
But the thing is, like, people are scared of her, and people don't speak because they are scared, and I don't know, I think we're just kind of seeing this snowball effect of what happens with so many of these cases. You know, you talk about the West Memphis 3, Making a Murder, Stephen Avery. Like, people have to speak up, otherwise this is going to get really out of control. You know, it's already out of control. Yeah. And
it really is, you know. What was the other one, too? Tiger King, you know? All this stuff about the Carol Baskin, you know, she killed her husband and all this. And it seems so convincing when they lay it out.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
And it really humanizes people. And that's not a bad thing. Like, people should be humanized, but it's emotional manipulation. And have you seen Convicting a Murderer, the Daily Wire kind of response to Making a Murderer that's kind of refuting the entirety of Making a Murderer? Have you watched it at all?
No, I never watched the response. I watched the 2 seasons of Making a Murderer, and it didn't convince me at all, not even a little bit. That's pretty damn convincing evidence with this guy's buying chains, you know, there's bones,
but
you know.
The fact that so many people buy into the manipulation shows you that it doesn't matter how obvious it is to some of us. You know, a lot of people just cannot look any deeper or choose to not look any deeper. But I want to get back to Rabia and Ellen solved the case because after Scott Peterson, I was outraged. I was outraged that they were advocating for that. But I gave them one more episode. I gave them one more episode before I was, like, ready to blow the whistle big time, okay? And in the next episode, they were arguing that the owl killed Kathleen Peterson rather than her husband, Michael Peterson.
Right. That's the staircase.
You're familiar with that case?
The staircase
Staircase case.
Yeah, which is what the original documentary was excellent. You know, I thought...
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, very interesting at least, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to, like, I believe, it is my opinion, that Michael Peterson was guilty, but you don't have to believe me. You can believe that she really fell down the stairs. But to say that an owl killed murdered her is offensive, frankly. It's like making a mockery of our justice system, I think. And like that, I mean, that poor woman and her family. But okay, so I was like, all right, this is the last straw. There's something really wrong here. So that is when I took to Reddit and decided I needed to find like-minded people. And I think also I kind of realized, I mean, it clicks for me, I guess.
Wait. So Alissa Fleck, AlissaFleck.com, her podcast is Gone from Glendale podcast, and she took to Reddit. Her first plan was to go to Soldier of Fortune and come up with a team. She was going to put together a team, but she calmed down and she took to Reddit. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Alissa. I had to do that.
I took a page from Scott Peterson's book, allegedly. I dipped into the mess, and I went on Reddit.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But sometimes it feels that way. Like, I ask myself, like, am I losing my mind? Am I losing my mind, or is everybody else? And I think the answer is that I'm losing my mind. But this is why I'm losing my mind. So I take to Reddit because I think if Rabia could be, in my opinion, so reckless about coming out and trying to get Scott Peterson out of jail, and it's my opinion that Scott Peterson very obviously murdered his wife and his unborn son, and I also think that Michael Peterson killed his wife, and just it's not even so much her opinions that were so off, it was the way that she quote-unquote solved the case was like she would just take one piece of cherry-picked information and be like, oh, I blew up the whole case. Like, this, it's like, right. No, that's not how it works. So it kind of was all falling apart in front of my eyes, and then people were saying to me, "You need to look deeper into Rabia because it goes back. It goes way further back than just this podcast. It goes back to Serial, and if she is so wrong and so reckless with regard to these very obvious cases, like what did we miss with Adnan Syed, right? And I think that's when I started to go deep, to really dig deep, like to really read the trial testimony, something I had not done before. Look at all the Baltimore police filings, and there are hundreds of them, and the full defense file as well, which finally got released, much to Rabia's chagrin. We got the full defense file, and that's also very telling. But I think the most alarming thing to me, actually, in all of this, the thing that really messed with me psychologically, is that I believe that Rabia and possibly even Adnan have, cornered the social media conversation around the cases so that if you try to write anything on Reddit that's not obviously pro-Adnan, they will get you, they will harass you, dox you, downvote you, suspend you. They're the mods, So I got permanent. My main email got permanently suspended from Reddit. Like, I can't go back on Reddit.
Oh no!
I've tried.
Well, go on SoldierFortune.com. Yeah, you know what? But that's from the playbook too of the West Memphis Three too, who have these trolls and bots and fake accounts and sock puppets that troll like crazy, man. It's very interesting how the same pattern over and over here.
Yeah. Well, it's just, it's gaslighting.
Yeah.
The things that I believe Adnan did to Hae, which are just the hallmarks of a controlling, narcissistic, domestic violence relationship, whether it's physical or psychological or both, it's happening on a grand scale to the general public. Like, it's, this kind of, it's mind control on a grand scale or a micro scale. It's really the same thing. And Serial, to me, was sort of Adnan's third appeal, because after his trial and after he was found guilty by the jury, he exhausted 2 appeals. And it was after he exhausted those 2 appeals that Rabia reached out to Sarah Koenig. And so Serial was the Hail Mary, and it worked. It worked. It did, I wouldn't say Serial got him out of jail in a direct way, but Serial absolutely helped get him out of jail in ways that I'm going to show you and demonstrate.
Quickly, because we only have a few minutes. We only have we have about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes we have. But not 9 minutes.
I can do it in 10 minutes.
Go ahead.
I can do it in 10. I can do it. Okay.
If I don't interrupt with jokes, go ahead.
All right. So my biggest grievance against Serial is that it has us looking in all the wrong places, right? Yeah. But the reason that I started looking so deeply was because I was like, why am I being silenced? Like, why was I kicked off of Reddit? Why am I being threatened? That happens, but it has never happened to this degree. And it just made me more and more suspicious of Rabia, because after 20 years, why in the middle of the night at 4 a.m., why is Rabia under one of her hundreds of Reddit usernames harassing me over this case allegedly on Reddit? Like, why is this her fight? Like, it makes you wonder, why is this her fight? And okay, I have to jump ahead because I have to get to everything. But what's important to note is that Rabia, there's a massive conflict of interest happening here, because Rabia and her brother, they were both witnesses for Adnan. They were witnesses in court for Adnan. And all of this information is coming from Rabia, and it's all misinformation. It's like a feedback loop of misinformation. Okay. So, just got really riled up. I have to calm myself down a little bit. Okay. So, all right. So, let's talk about the literal thing that gets Adnan out of jail. This is the motion to vacate, right? The motion to vacate his charges. We look at the evidence that is brought forward when they're trying to get him out of jail, and it really seems to me like they threw everything against the wall. Sure. They threw everything at it, and he already exhausted 2 appeals. This was a fair trial. This was due process, in my opinion. But they go after insufficient assistance of counsel, which you have to do, but they say that they come up with Brady violations, DNA. There's this DNA that wasn't looked at. There's these other suspects that wasn't looked at. And when you go down these items piece by piece, they all fall apart. When you apply logic, they all fall apart in front of your eyes. So for instance, one of the things in Serial, and Serial is referenced in the motion to vacate that gets Adnan out of jail. The podcast Serial is referenced. It's evidence. Okay. So one of the pieces, one of the major pieces is this letter that supposedly provides Adnan with an alibi. This letter is from a woman named Asia McClain, a girl named Asia McClain, who allegedly saw Adnan after school the day he was allegedly murdering Hae. So he couldn't have been murdering Hae because she saw him in the library. And this letter was never looked into, and it was never handed over to the defense, so this was a Brady violation. In fact, going back, when you really do an examination of the Asia McClain letter, Asia McClain, after writing this, she wrote this letter, she wrote a sworn affidavit. She wrote a sworn affidavit after Rabia went and visited her in person. But Asia McClain would never come and swear to anything in that affidavit in trial. She would never answer the phone when anybody tried to contact her. But Rabia appeared as a witness, and she said, I was a witness to Asia writing this affidavit, giving Adnan an alibi that day. The Asia McClain letters completely fall apart.
Did Syed, though, say he was at the library, too?
He did.
He did.
Well, he did after Asia McClain offered up his alibi for him.
Okay.
And everybody who's listening needs to go and read the Asia McClain letters. They are available online. There's some things about them that are highly questionable and highly dubious, including the fact that she says something, I think this is a quote, I want to help you account for some of your unaccountable time between 3 and 8 p.m. or something like that. And then she says, when you get released, all the girls are going to have crushes on you, like you're a big playa. So some people think that Adnan himself might have helped write these letters that are giving him the alibi.
Reminds me of the Jesse Muskelia, the wrestling alibis. He had like 25 people at a wrestling event say it was the wrong night, but it was the wrong night.
It's a playbook.
Yeah.
So there's other podcasts that people should go listen to, and we can. I don't know if it's worth giving them at the end, but that I think do a really good job, like laying out the facts.
Well, yeah, do it now because you only have like a minute left, but you can come back anytime.
Okay.
Alissa Fleck, this is great stuff. You can come back anytime. AlissaFleck.com.
Yeah, because I have so much more.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So people should go listen to the Prosecutor's Podcast, and I know that they are Republicans, and people have an issue with that. I am urging you to look beyond the source. In legal arguments, we say, don't attack the source, attack the argument. I urge you, I am a bleeding heart liberal. The Prosecutor's Podcast do 14 parts on Adnan Syed, and you need to listen to them because they do a really good job. And then there's another podcast called Crime Weekly. It's former police detective Garrick Levasseur and YouTuber Stephanie Harlow. They also do a several-parter on Hae Min Lee and Adnan Syed. You need to go listen to that as well.
What about his trials weren't filmed, right? They weren't televised, right?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think so.
There were parts of the West Memphis Reed trial that were televised that they have tapes of the entire trial, and you'd think it would be all over the place, but
they're hard to. Are they hard to find?
Yeah, but certain people have them. I know for a fact people have them.
Well, can I just say? I need to say one more thing about Adnan.
Go ahead.
Because I think there's one thing that has been lost in all of it. Well, the thing that's been lost in all of this is that Hae Min Lee was the victim, and she was an incredible person. She was beautiful. She was talented. She did so many things. Her family loved her. She has been completely lost. Her family has been hugely disrespected, and that's one of the things that makes me so passionate. So, but I want to end on something, and I wish Serial would have talked about this person, and he wasn't. I don't know what exactly the timelines were, but the day before Hae Min Lee was murdered, Adnan got a new cell phone. He bought a cell phone the day before she was murdered. The person who bought him that cell phone is a man named Bilal Ahmed. He was Adnan's mentor at the mosque, going way back. He bought him the cell phone. On that cell phone, Adnan called Hae Min Lee several times the night before she was murdered. Bilal Ahmed is in prison for the rest of his life. He is convicted of drugging and raping multiple children, and that was Adnan's mentor. That was the person who gave him the cell phone the day before Hae Min Lee was murdered. And we never hear about Bilal Ahmed. We hear about Best Buy and phone booths and what a great person he is, but we never hear about this absolute monster who was directly involved in his life. And there's so much more. There's so much more. But I'll come back and talk about the rest.
Yeah, and it's like that. I'm serious. It's like that in every case. You don't hear. Like I was just talking about the fertilizer chemical. There's so much stuff that behind the scenes people talk about. But it just never makes it onto these TV shows. Netflix is a huge problem. Alissa Fleck on Twitter. Yeah. Alissa Fleck, where she's been ranting and raving for weeks, which is why I had her on the show.
Thank you so much for listening to me, Ed. I just needed an outlet, and thank you.
I know.
More than you know.
You think I'm kidding about the Soldier of Fortune. We were worried about you there, Alissa. AlissaFleck.com, you could find her at her podcast, and you just hear how entertaining she is here. I'm sure the Gone from Glendale pod is right up there, too. Alissa, thank you so much. Woo. Anything I forgot to plug? No, we got everything, right?
Nope, you got everything. Thank you, Ed. You're the best.
No, you're the best. You can come back anytime. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
All right.
Good night.
All right.